Our next speaker this morning is a former high school teacher, so his presentation should be interesting and informative and accessible. He's somebody who genuinely loves what he does, which is sometimes rare, and he is also the very model of humility, and he requested only to be introduced as a member of technical staff at CERT. So our speaker is Timur Snoke, and his presentation is right here. So, thank you.
Thank you. So it looks a lot different from down there when you're getting ready to come up here. Thank you very much. My name is Timur Snoke. I work at CERT. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit more kind of from an operational perspective about some of the problems that I see us having trying to defend our networks. And I wanted to point out that I'm not actually going to be liable, or Carnegie Mellon's not going to be liable for anything that I say. And I don't want any of the comments that I make to be held against me. But before I get too much further, is anybody here from Lockheed Martin? MITRE? Ferguson, Missouri? Anonymous? Okay. All right, I don't want to offend anybody and sell anybody short, but I do want to call some people out. So the scope of my presentation is to talk about what the Net Defender is trying to do, how we're doing it, and some of the shortcomings that we encounter as we try to accomplish that end. There are a lot of challenges to being a Net Defender in the sense that you're trying to defend that'll go into the problem. So I'll try to identify some of the reasons why I think that it's hard to defend the network and some of the things that I've come across that we can do about it. All right, so the problem is Net Defenders are not really taught. There isn't a class, Net Defense 101, although SANS might, I'm sorry, is anybody here from SANS? SANS might make you think that you can get a certificate and immediately become a Net Defender, but for the most part, it's a trade that's kind of handed down from one person to another, and there's not any single rubric that you can internalize and ingest and make life better. We have a lot of fantastic academics that are doing outstanding research and generating a lot of really great results, but we don't have a whole lot of bridges to try to take those academic understandings of the way in which the world works and put it into practical applications that Joe the plumber can take advantage. Anybody associated with wastewater management or anything like that? Okay. But I think that one of the things that we do at CERT is we try to take the things that we've learned about really big networks and reduce it down into something that's actionable. And that's what I'm hoping to accomplish here by bringing to light some of the stuff that I've come across that works and doesn't. A couple things to point out is that So I'm saying that network defense, the coverage of the network defense is really challenging because we don't necessarily know if our perimeter is fully instrumented. Are there ways to get into and out of our network? Anybody have a cell phone here that's got wireless access? Do you take it to work? Do you plug it in to charge it on the workstation that you've got at work? There are all of these different ways that we have kind of ways to pivot into the network that we're not necessarily conscious of that are wonderful challenges for the Net Defender. We have a lot of alerts that are being generated by all the wonderful expensive security software that we deploy on our network, and so we play whack-a-mole and do a risk analysis to figure out what's worth our time to actually address. Attribution is amazing. If I can say that North Korea hacked Sony, I have just created a better PowerPoint slide deck with some wonderful pie charts to explain the ROI on the security investment I just made. I don't feel like it helps us to just put a label on something because it doesn't tell us how to solve the problem and to get them out of the network. The other thing that I think is really interesting is how challenging it is to get really good reporting for an event that's happening in the network. I was trying to get any and all information that I could get from open source things on the Sony compromise from last month, and I found out from People magazine that it was North Korea that did it. And I know that they've got a bunch of cybersecurity experts, so I'm pretty confident that they're exactly right. But there isn't really anything concrete that I can stick my teeth into that can help me protect myself from the North Korea that has something to do with Sony Entertainment. So the goal of this, as any other presentation on net defense, is to try to help people develop a repeatable methodology so they can actually enrich the context of the threat to better respond to it. So it's not just a question of, let's put our finger on the threat, let's figure out how we can actually address it. Some of the things I'd like to talk about is, the reason why I called out Lockheed Martin, the cyber kill chain is something that I've been familiar with for a couple years now, and I've been kind of confused as to how to apply it in net defense. A new thing that I just came across last year is something called the diamond model, which is a very interesting paper that's on a public-facing military website, the DTIC, and I'm going to reference it a bunch of times. It is written by 3 people that are associated with a company that doesn't exist, but has a LinkedIn page with a bunch of people that are following it. So it's a very interesting paper, but I don't think that it's actually out there in popular usage. Being that this is an academic group, I think that we have probably more than a few people that have seen it. But I want to talk a lot about that to try to continue getting it further out there into the community. So the method for solving all of our problems: identify, evaluate, capture, expand, aggregate, mitigate, remediate, rinse, and repeat. Or if you put the acronym together, it's just, when you're talking about that or in the water cooler, it'll make a lot of sense to the people you're working with. The things that we need to synthesize to actually do this job of defending the network is manage the incidents, do intelligence analysis, leverage the kill chain as it helps, and look at the diamond model to expand our understanding of what the threat is. And I think that the thing I was missing with the kill chain was the relationship to the diamond model. And that, I think, is making my world a better place, and hopefully by the end of the presentation, you see rainbows too. So incident management. This is an interesting picture because it's from 2004, so it's a decade old. And I think it highlights what incident management is, but also kind of highlights what some of the problems are, right? So if you look, prepare, like we're setting up the network, is separated from protect the network. So, okay, I'm building out a network. What am I going to do? Am I going to hire the GWiz architects on day one that are going to build out the network and stay with me for the duration? No, I'm going to get a consultant or a contractor to come in, build out a really pretty network, and then I'm going to hire a bunch of like tier 2 people to manage the network, and whenever I have a problem, I go back to tier 1. But as the network grows and evolves, because the network is a living thing, the actual network itself is going to keep changing, and the people that are protecting it aren't necessarily working with the operations side. So they don't know what they're defending. Again, the perimeter is permeable, and it becomes more permeable the longer the network is active. We have all these great inputs that are coming into our defensive posture, and if we could pay attention to all of them, we would know exactly what's wrong with our network and what's going on, but trying to go through half of that list is like trying to drink from a fire hose. And a lot of people just don't have the time, the effort, or the wherewithal to sort through all of that. Intelligence analysis is great. You get ground truth on things. You use all kinds of different sources to identify what the assets are, what the targeting capabilities of the adversary is, and all of this, and how many groups, normal businesses actually have people that are focused on intelligence analysis. We don't. We're dependent upon other people to do it, but other people have equities in the intelligence that they've gathered, and they can't necessarily share it because they might disclose what their methods were, or some other information, or they have some equity in the information itself that they can't share it. So intelligence analysis is kind of like this great idea, but it's just not something that's accessible for everybody. So maybe what we need to do is try to focus on doing more intelligent analysis with the resources that we do have access to see what we can come up with, without external dependencies, so we solve our own problems. And of course, I try to use my primary source for all information that's truthful, Wikipedia, on this. So this is where I got really excited about the cyber kill chain. So the thing that's really important here is that it allows professionals to proactively remediate and mitigate advanced threats in the future. So I'm not sure, but I think there's a timing issue here. So how do I proactively remediate? I'm going to get ahead of something and behind it at the same time, and after I finish doing that pirouette, my network's going to be defended. That doesn't make sense to me. But MITRE's interpretation of the cyber kill chain, which is a little bit different from what Lockheed Martin put out, but it's a popular view because it simplifies this important point. The center of the cyber kill chain, it's a 7-step process of the concept of a bad thing happening all the way to your CEO is stepping down in just a tremendous amount of confusion because he doesn't really understand how to do his own PowerPoints anyways. But the exploit part is this pivot where up to that point, the network hasn't been compromised and isn't under attack. But after that point, it is, right? And so in the Air Force, they would say, this is boom, right? So this is where the bomb blows up and stuff starts going really bad. And the goal of most cybersecurity experts is this fictitious concept of, let's get to the left of boom. Let's come back towards, where they're preparing to attack our network and figure out a way to prevent that. And it's kind of like, okay, so what I want to do is I want to wait until they've blown up our network, and I want to go back in time and put in a firewall rule to block that IP. How do we do that? I don't know if that's a reasonable thing, but it seems like there's a lot of marketing speak with a lot of security vendors that make us think we can be proactive and defend our network against the threat that we've never seen. And because I've never been attacked by Burma, I know that money's paid off. All right. So, but I do think that there is an interesting thing here. Like, I'm not going to just bash the cyber kill chain. I think this is an interesting progression that kind of shows you some things that you actually can watch happening on your network. Like, you understand that there's a progression. They're not going to compromise your network until they've gotten onto it, until they've delivered some kind of exploit or something like that. But am I ever really going to pay attention to the log files that tell me that they've been doing recon? I mean, how many times do you get port scans or any kind of scan, like SYN scans, whatever, kind of things in your network? It's noise. It's always happening. So to point this out is like, hey, there's a recon phase. Am I ever going to care? Maybe. If you just have your cable modem at your house and you're doing all kinds of, you have a full security stack, $250,000 worth of network security equipment on it, yeah, I'm going to protect my kids. All right, so this is what I thought was really cool. The diamond model becomes this formal method of applying this stuff, making our life better, and puppy dogs and rainbows. It provides a way that is repeatable. You can test your assumptions, and you can use it to make magic happen. And we'll talk about that in a second. The thing that I think is really valuable with the diamond model is it characterizes an event and places it within a context in the stuff that you can see, right? It's not just kind of like, these are abstract things, somebody's doing recon on you, and then they're going to do something bad. It ties everything together, and you should, as the net defender, be able to see all of this stuff in some form or fashion, right? For every event that happens on a network where a host is compromised, there is some bad guy using a capability, leveraging some infrastructure to deliver that content and get you. And if you look at the example, like the Ferguson thing, where Anonymous doxed the Ferguson Police Department, right? So they decided that they were going to use something to do like a SQL injection attack on a web server. That's their capability. And they went against the infrastructure, which was just, they didn't have to leverage a bunch of external things. They just went straight after the SQL server. They were able to get onto it. And then the victim in this sense is a bunch of PII, right? So, axiom 1. There's 7 axioms. There's going to be a quiz, and there's also going to be a corollary. If we, in our reporting infrastructure, right, where we're logging stuff for our own benefit, were to include all of the components of the diamond model, I think that we would help ourselves a lot, because there's a lot of very, very good information here, and there are plenty of tools and plenty of incident sharing tools that can facilitate sharing this information. And it just, to me, it makes sense, because it's not a lot of work to get this done. The core features are the 4 parts of the diamond. The meta features are enhancements to the event, the things that might not necessarily be completely obvious. Like phase would be the part of the cyber kill chain that the event is that you're talking about, or how far it got. The result is whether or not they were successful, obviously. Direction's interesting because it's talking about whether or not the traffic is going in or out, right? We really want to know if this is something about exfil or if this is about like a DDoS, right? The methodology is actually what was the thing? Was it a spear phishing attempt? Was it a DDoS? And the resources are what are the components that were leveraged to do it? Resources becomes kind of interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. All right, so axioms 2 and 3, adversary and the victim. Okay, so the adversaries are really kind of an interesting thing because they're 2 classes of adversaries. There's inside people and outside people, right? Disgruntled employees. The adversary can also be one of kind of 3 different things. It could be an operator, somebody who does malicious things. It could be an engineer, somebody who makes malicious things, right? And it could also be a consumer, somebody who buys malicious things. We're finding more and more that, because of the wonder of the cloud and the Amazon Web Services, now you can get a denial of service attacks as a service, right? And so you can like rent the Internet of Things to hose somebody, and we're seeing evidence of that happening. The victims, it would be great if we could make perfect systems, but that would mean that we probably never turn them on, and we don't plug them into any walls. And we take their battery out, and we disconnect all of the solder joints. But every victim is either a person, or it's a capability, or it's an object, or it's something that can be monetized. Like a credit card on the open market now is like $1, right? But the PII that you get out of a medical system is like $20, right? So there are all these things that can be monetized, and those are all kind of components that are under the umbrella of what a victim is. All right, phase and resources. This is really interesting. So if you're trying to model attacks, right, keep in mind that a phase always consists of 2 steps. There's no single like detonation of a bomb. There's always something else that has to happen. And so examples would be that you have a SQL injection attack to get access to a server that then phones home, and you're able to put whatever the rootkit is onto the machine that you're then going to compromise the host with, right? You have you send a malicious email that in the spear phishing thing that tells people that they've won a lot of money from a Nigerian prince, and they need to click on this link and fill out this paperwork and send their phone number, their mother's maiden name, and their social security number, and then they'll be rich. The resources is also an interesting thing, where Dan in his analysis pipeline example was talking about like the naughty neighbor kind of conversation, where you can look at things where there has to be a DNS lookup for the malicious domain that's doing domain flux, right? That's moving from one IP address to another. So the actual C2 server isn't in one place. It's moving all over the place. But for them to get access to it, they have to do something preliminary to actually target and get there. So if we extend the diamond model to include the meta features, we can start drawing relationships. There's a social political relationship between the adversary and the victim, okay? And it could be that there's a very close connection. There's an advanced persistent threat where somebody's got, they've got somebody's number and they really want some kind of asset or resource, right? According to some open source information, was it the GOP, the Gang of Peace, or whatever was it? Is that right? I'm sorry, the Guardians of Peace, right? Not associated with any political group in the United States. The Guardians of Peace were in Sony's network for over a year, right? So that's an advanced persistent threat. They moved 100 terabytes of data out of the network. Now, if you were just moving 100 terabytes of data out of the network onto a T1 line, that would take 6,500 days. Now, they're moving those movies out before they were actually published, right? And the fact that you have a continuous, persistent connection, even if it was a 100 meg link, right? If it's a 100 meg link, it's 100 days to move 10 times the Library of Congress out the door. The fact that you don't see that going to one IP, again, you hired the contractors and the consultants to build the network, and then you hire the tier 2 people to maintain it, and it's not their fault that they didn't realize that they had this huge FTP store that was allowing anonymous access or whatever the problem was. There's also a connection between the capability and the infrastructure. I'm not going to create binaries that can run on ARM and expect that your MacBook is going to be able to run it, right? These things are tied together. And the meta features kind of fleshes it out. You include all of those in an incident report, or if you're giving information, like if you're part of one of the ISACs, right? If you're part of one of these information sharing groups, and when you come up with an incident, you're able to include all of this information and pass it along, you're going to be providing them a whole lot of value, because then they have a starting place to consider when they're looking at problems on their network. More often than not, I see incident reports that are like People Magazine. They give you kind of the flashy attribution thing, but don't give you any substance to allow you to defend yourself. All right. Social, political, and the persistence things. All right, so I've kind of touched on both of these already. And there is a placeholder just for axioms 6 and 7 in the corollary. All right, so let's apply this. Now, going back to the real Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, here are the 7 steps, and here are the indicators that you would see at each step along the way, right? So they do their reconnaissance, they develop a recipient list because they've farmed your website, and then they create a benign file that's like some kind of PDF that they think is going to be something that you're interested in. They weaponize it, and they put some kind of weird encryption in there that shouldn't be, that's not too expensive for them to put together, but might be able to get past your mail filters. They email it, make it look like it's something legitimate. They spoof an address or however they get it onto your network, but they make it somehow relevant to the group that they were doing recon against, right? The spearfish is successful. Somebody clicks a link. The exploitation happens. They own the box. The box phones home, pulls down a bunch of new tools, installs it, or maybe they're all in the email. Reach out to a C2 server, and it's game over. Now, this is essentially what the cyber kill chain does, and I thought this was going to be my ultimate solution, this was going to be my panacea, and once I understood this, all my problems were solved. But this only maps out a single event, and it doesn't give me the ability to take it further and to expand it beyond, this is what happened and this is how I got owned, right? I'm not able to proactively remediate anything with this. So the diamond model helps in the sense that the assumption is everybody's going to get owned, so let's just respond as quickly as we can when we do. So starting with the victim, I've been owned. I discovered that I've got some malware on my network, right? So what we're doing is we're walking the edges to the directly connected nodes. So victim tied to capability. I discovered that there's malware on my network, right? So I see the malware on my network. I realize that my workstation is suddenly contacting a C2 domain that I hadn't interacted with before, right? So that goes from capability over to infrastructure, right? So I look at the C2 domain, I do a lookup on that, I find out what the IP address is for the C2 domain, right? And then I look at the firewall logs to see if anybody else has been talking to that IP address, and I find that I've got half of my HR office is now talking to this wonderful C2 address. I take a look at the IP address, and I look for registration information, and then I find out that it's actually owned by one of my competitors who's been trying to find out how I'm able to hire all these people out from under them and what kind of benefit package I'm offering them. And so I have the adversary understood. You know, we have the ability to expand the capability and take a look at the IP address and potentially find a bunch of other domains that have been registered to it, or we can find that some of those domains were registered to it and then actually have moved on to another IP address. And there are a bunch of different things that we potentially can look at if we have access to those resources. But this gives me the power to walk through my compromise and potentially extend my understanding of what it was that happened to me, and allows me to move that further. If I capture those components along the way in the reporting that I do for myself and the reporting that I share with other people, I'm providing some value beyond kind of my four walls. So if we put it all together, the cyber kill chain provides a progression to track the compromise. The diamond model provides the ability to do attribution. And one thing that I guess I didn't point out is if we think of the diamond model as an event that we can expand upon and amplify, we can take the diamond model and find similar diamonds that share common characteristics. And if we say that we have like 3 characteristics in common from one diamond to another, we can consider them possibly related. One of the important parts that I didn't highlight when I broke out all the different components to the event was that there's a confidence level with every different feature. So we could say that the Guardians of Peace are independent of North Korea, right? And just treat them as being, they are just who they say they are. And they could be, we have some indicators that they're saying that they're North Korea. We have some other indicators that they're saying they're disgruntled employees, and allow there to be both scenarios, but say, this is a diamond of somebody who compromised us. Then we find another event where similar tools were used, similar C2 servers were used, and we can relate those together as being part of a bigger campaign. The goal really is to leverage the understanding that we have of the events that happen, enrich the context, find all the different open source things that we can do to provide that value, like to use things like IP to whois tools or indirect DNS resolution things, passive DNS, group the common characteristics consistently, and then that whole pivoting around the diamond is essentially a variation of indicator expansion, where, as Jono wrote in a wonderful paper, it's a method of, it's kind of a formal algebra for defining how you go and convert like an IP address to a domain name and expand upon that and take those domain names and find similar domain names or find similar second level domains that are related and things like that. So that's it. If we can be more intelligent as we defend our networks, then we're going to make it cost prohibitive for the adversary that's trying to take us over, and that's really it. I mean, the whole thing about the Internet of Things becoming the next DDoS is because it's really cheap to scan a bunch of embedded Linux boxes. If they were to start putting security on those embedded Linux boxes in the Internet of Things, it wouldn't be such an easy target and something that's going to be leveraged as much as it will be in the near future. All right. I'm going to open it up for questions. I think I might be a little bit early, but I will identify that I have resources listed on the document. Please pull it down. Read the diamond model, because I think that's probably one of the most valuable papers that I've read in the last 2 years. And here's my contact information.
Should I go first?
Please.
So my question is, how do they go about with the confidence bit?
That's great. It really has to do with the intelligence analysis, where you identify how much you believe the source. And you probably come up with some arbitrary ranking system versus, I'm sorry, not versus, but you probably come up with a ranking system saying, I have ground truth on this, so I'm 100% confident that this is what I think it is, or I have 50% confidence that this is something that somebody told me, but I don't know if I trust them or not.
It starts with some sort of subjective kind of thing, or is it I mean, in the paper, do they do anything formal in terms of that sort of thing, or is it just like pick your confidence score and then sort of relate everything internally coherent versus that?
I think that they open the door for that for future work, but I would love to figure out how we can come up with something like that to manage the different problem spaces we work in, and to be able to talk about the confidence level without kind of tipping our hand if we're using privileged resources or where those intersect or collide. Thank you.
Timur, thank you. You mentioned that the incident response process wasn't quite working for you, or how it was modeled there. Do you have any recommendations for how to adjust that, given these new models that we have since the incident response model came out?
Yeah, I think the biggest concern that I have is the separation between the operations side and the defenders. That there isn't kind of an iterative process where we're maintaining situational awareness of what the assets are, or what our perimeter looks like. I think I'm convinced that we can't get ahead of all of the problems that are presenting to our network, but if we understand what the assets are on our network and what their value is, we can better defend them in a more timely fashion. And that's the thing that I think is missing in this process. Sir?
Hi, disclaimer, I'm not from Ferguson, but I'm from Missouri. I'm actually in the Missouri National Guard. I teach these models to a lot of budding analysts. And
Fantastic.
yeah, it's awesome. More people should use them. But the disclaimer I always give them is that they're just models, and you have to massage them to what fits.
Yes.
I actually find I've worked with the diamond model quite a bit in practice, so I don't have a specific question, just comment. In practice, it turns into I have 4 big buckets of indicators, adversary, victim, infrastructure, and capability, and I just throw it in there. And if it shares a similar bucket to an existing thing that I know about, then it's the same thing. And that provides you that pivoting, but the same enrichment and pivoting that you provided in your example, I find, in my mind at least, it fits better in the kill chain, in that and in fact, in the paper itself, I think Sergio, one of the authors, suggests combining the two, where the diamond can represent a particular event, and the kill chain represents a set of campaigns, or a per campaign.
Right.
And I found that to really be the most flexible, because you can pivot within the event according to the diamond. And then you can also pivot that if there's an implant somewhere on your box, then it had to get there somehow. So there had to be an installation phase.
Sure.
And so you go back that way. Just provide that for food for thought. So
that's absolutely a great point. And that's the phase part. Like, 2 things. One is when you have a bunch of buckets and you're comparing things and you just say, okay, they match these buckets, that's where the confidence would come in, to try to say how related you feel. And this, again, it's kind of speculative and more of a gut thing, where you can tie 2 events together into a campaign. But the phase component, as I understand it as a meta feature, is actually what phase of the kill chain the event is that you're describing. So those are great points. Thank you for the clarification. All right, John?
Yeah, when I see models parameterized in this way, one of the questions I always ask is, how sensitive are the computations that you do with those confidences on the confidence values? Does a small change in one of those confidences make a big change in what you do, which means you have to be very, very accurate in getting it if the result is going to be meaningful? Or can you go over a wide range of confidence values with relatively little change in the computation you'd make using it?
Again, I think that's kind of feeding off of Rhiannon's question.
Yeah.
And my answer is, I don't know. I think that the confidence is something that helps you to try to group stuff together, but until I've actually seen more done with it, I think it's more of a gut as opposed to something that's actually statistically meaningful.
So it's essentially a subjective factor that get entered in rather than a computational one at this stage of
At this stage,
things.
I'm bringing some pseudoscience into this.
I had one more question about Axiom 5.
Yes, sir.
Without getting into X-rated territory, how does one go about satisfying a resource?
So a resource could be a DNS lookup. I
Okay.
mean, it's saying that you're not going to have a single event compromise your network. You're going to have multiple things happen. Like, you're not necessarily going to have poison ivy with all of the different libraries installed at the initial deployment. there's going to be a callback and getting instructions from a C2 server. So
Okay, so it isn't that you're satisfying a resource, that there are requirements on the resource that must be satisfied rather than the resource itself being satisfied.
Yes, I appreciate that clarification.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, I couldn't parse it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if you want any more information about the diamond model, I've linked it a couple times on these pages.
Hey, Timur. When I've looked at the examples for cyber kill chain, diamond model, et cetera, they're all sort of APT targeted, attacker oriented. I wonder if you've seen any work or if there's much in the model for dealing with attackers who are opportunistic, random scanners, people who are just trying to take over something because it's available. Is it absorbed into it? Is it an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it works really well because you really have the whole chain of, from the APT to the, as we were talking about the persistence, which I kind of glossed over, there's a continuum of what the social political relationship is, and it could be that they just want your asset to mine Bitcoins. It's not necessarily that they care that that you work at whatever organization you work at. It's that you have a resource that they just want to take advantage of.
So we could sort of say that in the case of Axiom 6, the relationship might be just that the victim is accessible?
Yes,
Okay.
entirely.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So fantastic analysis, love it. I wanted to provide a supporting data point and then build from that to a somewhat larger question.
Sure.
NSS Labs actually published back in last August a paper that addressed the fact that most of the threat industry, the people who are actually selling solutions and making money off this, tend to be focused on the blocking in real time, what you call so nicely getting to the left of boom.
Yes.
And NSS Labs said, kind of heretically, it's not about the 98% that you catch. It's about the 2% that you miss.
Absolutely.
And they then went on to develop this notion of the need for building cyber resiliency into the networks, which is great. It gets us back to this infrastructure thing. And the infuriating thing about the infrastructure is that this is stuff that in most cases is ours. The attackers are using our equipment to get to our stuff. Right? In most parts of life, and here comes the question, there's such a thing as a home field advantage. But it seems like in a lot of the actual network compromises, the attackers almost know more about the network than the defenders do. Why is that? Why is this special?
I'm filtering through all the different levels of classification that I can use to answer your question. It's become trivial for the adversary to enumerate our network. It's become trivial for the adversary to gain a foothold in our network. And I don't have a good answer for you because I think that the revelation that I have is that it's broken, it's going to be broken, it's going to continue to be broken. We have systems that provide critical services that were end of life, for the general population a decade ago. And I just remember when I was working in the energy sector, we had a major system that was providing controls for electrical components that were serving a grid that was running off of OS2 or OS2 warp or whatever that was. Yeah. And our backup solution was we had 3 identical machines right next to each other, and that was it. I don't know, but I think that things like the diamond model and the relationship with the cyber kill chain help us advance our effort and go towards a teachable moment, as opposed to just making network defenders that are born in a trial of fire.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Let me add one comment to your observation there. It is trivial for the adversaries to profile our networks, and they do. It would be trivial for us to profile our own networks so we actually knew what was there, and we don't.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I mentioned that a couple times at the start, but I didn't want to beat us up too much. Thank you.